It's Christmas time. And you know what that means. Blood.
I'll tell you something. I love Christmas. The music, the decorations, getting together with family, sharing games and food, and the kids all having a good time and believing in magic. But sometimes it feels like we've forgotten the darker side of the season, a time where children weren't just waiting for Santa Claus, but were also waiting for the arrival of the Bellschnickel and Krampus. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the books that remind us of the darker side of the season. I would say most of these books are Christmas related, but some of them are just kind of set around the wintry season. So I guess you could think of this list as winter horror. Also, just as a bonus, this list is going to contain my favorite book of all time. So yeah, there's a little teaser for you. Anyway, let's get started with the first book, and that is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. NOS Foru. It's his number plate. It's clever. So this book has the main character, Victoria McQueen, and she's a character who early in her life discovers that she has this supernatural gift for finding lost things. For example, her dad loses his watch, or he loses his car keys, and she can just go to her special place and find them. But because she's special, her gift captures the attention of Charles Manx, who is the villain of this story, and this bloke is bloody creepy. Charles Manx has his own special abilities, and he drives around in this haunted Rolls-Royce Wraith. Really difficult for me to say that in my accent. And he kidnaps kids to save them from their immoral parents and take them to this nightmarish place called Christmas Land, hence why it's on this list. This place is like a surreal, twisted version of holiday cheer, just turned into a terrifying nightmare. If you imagine the movie A Nightmare Before Christmas, you know, Jack Skellington's idea of what Christmas is, you'll have a rough idea of what I'm talking about. Charles Manx doesn't work alone, though. He has a sidekick called the Gingerbread Man, also a deeply disturbed and frightening character, maybe more frightening than Charlie Manx. I don't know. It's close. They're both terrifying. Also, if you're unaware, Joe Hill is the son of Stephen King. So if you're a big Stephen King fan, there's actually a couple of Easter eggs buried into this book that suggest Stephen King's characters and Joe Hill's characters share the same world. So I always enjoy that sort of thing, honestly. I know it can be a little bit gimmicky, but I don't know, I like it. And whilst we're on the subject of Stephen King, why not bring up what I consider to be maybe the ultimate winter horror, and that is The Shining by Stephen King. Obviously, this is one of the books that are not directly related to Christmas. This book takes place over the season, and I feel like winter and the elements play a huge role in the atmospheric horror of this book. This year, I was actually lucky enough to go to the Stanley Hotel in Colorado and do the Stephen King tour. So if you don't know, the Stanley was the inspiration for the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. And it's probably one of my favorite locations in any horror book. Jack Torrance is a writer. He's struggling to find inspiration. And so he takes a job as a caretaker when tourism is kind of like out of season and when it becomes impossible for guests to make it to or from the hotel. But obviously that means as well that Jack and his family, who he moves into the hotel, are also not going to be able to make it out for the season. So they're all trapped in there together. And it quickly becomes apparent that the hotel is haunted by something sinister. I really love this book. It's claustrophobic. I like the feeling of being trapped in a location where you can't get out and you just have to survive by any means necessary. The isolation, the kind of mounting tension between the characters and the creeping sense of dread that there's no escape. This is one of Stephen King's best books. There can be no doubt about it, I think. Yeah, one of my favorites, no doubt. The next book is The Visitor by Sergio Gomez. So this book is set on Christmas Eve in Indiana, and the state is suffering a once-in-a-century snowstorm, and a group of strangers all find shelter in this roadside diner, and they're trying to make the best of a bad situation, trying to keep up some holiday cheer in the situation that they've all found themselves in, until another stranger shows up and they're not from this planet. I think this book is like the perfect pick if you want a short and intense story that quickly establishes the characters and gets started with building tension. This little thing is like, it felt like watching an episode of The Twilight Zone. It's kind of playful in that way. It's similar in a way as well to The Shining in that it's very claustrophobic, with the atmosphere playing a big role again in the horror. It's such a quick read as well. And so it's not going to be like a big time investment. The prose isn't beautiful. It's very straightforward. The plot can get clunky in places, but it scratched an itch for Christmas horror sci-fi that I didn't know I had until I picked up this book. Next up, Let the Right One In by John Ajvide Lindqvist. I think this book is going to end up on my top 10 books that I read in 2024. I'm still considering it. I finished it about a week ago, and yeah, it was amazing. It was really good. This was actually recommended to me by one of my subscribers and a regular commenter named Skunk. Skunk with a E at the end. And so thank you for that, by the way. This is another one of those that isn't so much Christmas related as it is set in the dark and wintry season. It's about a young boy growing up in a rough neighborhood in Sweden. His name is Oscar. He's being bullied every day by some local bad kids. And when we meet him, he's kind of like acting in a subservient way to them. He bows his head, he humiliates himself for their entertainment. And he does all of this so that he can kind of live a quiet, easy life. Basically, he's just trying to avoid getting beaten up. And so immediately you feel for this kid. And then one day, some new neighbors move in, and he forms a deep connection with Eli. Her name is spelled E-L-I, but I think it's pronounced Eli. And she is this mysterious young girl who seems like strangely physically strong and confident for her age. And it turns out, this isn't a spoiler, all right? So just so you know, this is not a spoiler. This is the premise of the whole story, so don't get angry. It turns out that she is a vampire. And so we get to see this friendship bloom between Eli and Oscar. The story is a slow burn, and it's very sweet in places, but when the horror hits, it's very visceral and vivid. This might actually be my new favorite vampire book. I mean, I love Salem's Lot. So, you know what I mean? I need to think about that one. Salem's Lot, it was so far above any other vampire book that I'd ever read for me. Even though I'd read Dracula, I like Dracula, right? But Salem's Lot was just so creepy. But this one, it might be as good as Salem's Lot. It might be a little bit better. I don't know. I need a bit of time. But it's incredibly dark. It doesn't shy away from any subject. So if you're like a sensitive reader, I think you're going to want to check the trigger warnings before you dive into it. For example, there's a lot of scenes which hint at inappropriate stuff with kids, right? So, some really dark stuff that a lot of people might just say, no, that's like a red line for me. I don't read about that kind of thing. But it's very gritty. It's disturbing. There are parts of it which are very beautiful. It's like a beautiful story of friendship. And I loved it. Thanks again, Skunk. Next up is The Fright Before Christmas, Surviving Krampus and Other Yuletide Monsters by Jeff Ballinger. So this is kind of like a non-fiction book in a way. It's about like folklore and the forgotten traditions of Christmas and winter solstice. This is another book that I picked up on Audible. It was on the Audible sale that just happened a little while ago. Picked it up for like a couple of dollars, but I'm so glad that I took a chance on it. This book is just filled with eerie stories about legends such as Krampus. He's this horned figure from Alpine folklore who punishes naughty children during the Christmas season. Whereas Santa is rewarding the good kids, he's punishing the bad kids. And the towns where they still celebrate him have parades for him and this kind of thing. I'd love to go to one of those. Everyone dresses up as these characters like Krampus, and also the Bellschnickel, who whips naughty children with switches. If the Bellschnickel sounds familiar, then you might recognize that name from an episode of the US version of The Office.
Oh, Bellschnickel!
Where Dwight Schrute comes in dressed as him and he starts slapping Jim around with a switch.
Oh! Are you nuts?
That's a great episode, by the way. It even goes into the origins of Santa Claus and also Saint Nicholas, who originally these were two separate people, and how the Christian faith celebrated Saint Nicholas to such a degree that at one point more churches were named after Saint Nicholas than any of the apostles. I think what I liked most about this book is the way that it breaks down the ways in which religions and cultures kind of borrow from each other to create their traditions and their celebrations. And it highlights how many of the things that we celebrate today come from older stories and darker times. And actually, this book leads us perfectly into the next book, Krampus, the Yule Lord by Brom. This was one of my favorites, man. This is good. So it's a dark reimagining of Christmas mythology. It sort of flips the script and turns Krampus into a vengeful anti-hero out to reclaim his legacy that was stolen from him by Santa Claus. And in the middle of this kind of like epic battle between these ancient gods, you could call them. Jesse is a struggling musician in West Virginia. He's down on his luck. His kid is being raised by another man who's moved in with his wife. He's living in a trailer park. He's got no money to buy his daughter any presents for Christmas. Nothing is going right for this bloke until he discovers Santa's magical sack. Oi, oi. This book was much better than I was expecting it to be. I kind of thought, it's going to be a bit of fun. It might be a little bit gimmicky in places, No, it was just pure fun. And I think it's probably one of my favorite standalone fantasy / horrors that I've ever read. You should know going into this that it's not scary at all. But there are horror and gore elements to it. It would certainly be, I think, categorized as a horror, definitely. But yeah, it's not the kind of horror that's scary, if you know what I mean. And on top of that, the subplot of Jesse trying to win back his family in this town that's kind of been left behind and is not everyone, but a lot of characters are addicted to meth. It's actually just like a great character drama. And so this one, I would say, is just all about magical, gritty realism. And yes, there are elves, And yes, there are reindeer, Krampus, the Belschnickel. These two fantasy worlds are just colliding together. It's just a really good time. Next up is Cold People by Tom Rob Smith. So Cold People is all about humanity's forced relocation to Antarctica after an alien invasion where the survivors have to adapt to the harsh environment, while scientists are like kind of pushed. They're pushing scientific and ethical boundaries to ensure humanity's survival. I don't want to say much more than that because I don't want to give any spoilers of what the book is like all about. But some of this book is kind of about the Arctic survival horror, but it's a lot of it is to do with the monsters that humans are willing to become in order to survive and kind of like reinvent themselves as a species. So I really liked this one, and I mean, just look at it. This isn't a beach read, you know. You want to read this book when you look out your window and you see snow. Next up is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. So some of you are going to go, bloody hell, this bloke cannot stop talking about this book. He talks about it all the time. I do. It does feel like I talk about this book every month, but I can't help it, you know, and it belongs on this list. This is like a psychological thriller about a young woman who's on a road trip with her boyfriend to visit his parents. And throughout the trip, she's contemplating ending the relationship, but things very quickly take like a strange and unsettling turn. The story dives into themes of loneliness and identity and reality, and it's got this eerie and disorienting atmosphere that keeps you questioning what's real and what's not. More than any other book on this list, this book is what I find to be unsettling, and it gives you more questions than answers. And I think that the unique thing that makes this book scary is its sense of like creeping dread and psychological unease. It's like a sort of unseen, unknown threat that's standing behind you, but when you turn around, it's gone, and you're like, I know something's in the room with me. It's like that. Whenever I mention this book, I always have to mention as well that the audiobook is great. I think there's something that happens in this book that makes the audiobook really different. I'd recommend it. One of the best books that I read in 2023, and even now sometimes I think back to it and go, oh, that was good. And finally, I couldn't make a Christmas horror list without talking about the original and most famous of all Christmas horrors, and that is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I picked up this copy when I visited Charles Dickens' home in Doughty Street in London. I went back home to visit last Christmas. This book is actually my favourite book of all time, and I think it's because it's a book about decency and second chances and the human heart, and how even in the darkest of the human hearts, there's still some light in it. There's still some room for redemption, that the worst people you know were made that way by circumstances, and that we should have goodwill towards people even when it's hard. And it's a book that suggests that if we could just take a peek into the secret lives of others and just understand them better, then we'd come away thinking better of them, and others would think better of us. And I read it every year. I cry every time I read it. This year, I actually narrated it for viewers of this channel. So if you'd like to get into the Christmas spirit, then you can click up here and listen to my reading of A Christmas Carol. Thanks so much for watching this video, and Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. If you don't, then I hope that at least you picked up some scary reads for winter. Anyway, happy reading.